I'm actually very pleased to introduce tonight's speakers. I was reflecting on this, and it was kind of shocking that I believe it was 20 years ago that I first saw the work of Linda and Armand, which was a poster, which may have been their first collaboration, since I think it was done while they were in school. Someone had just returned from the Netherlands with a very large roll of posters from different designers, some famous, some not so famous. The details of the design remain rather vague, but what I still remember now is how vividly it stood out from that stack of rather incredible work. A few years later, I encountered more posters and yet another object, this time an art catalog, which also seemed to appear out of nowhere. And all of these objects still look fresh today, which I think is an amazing achievement. And all of these were, in fact, designed by Mevis Van Deursen. This process of discovery is becoming actually more of a distinct pattern. Their ability to stay afloat on the constantly changing waters of Dutch graphic design, navigating new territories for 20 years seems both unlikely and, quite frankly, exhausting. Nevertheless, they've accomplished it. In their recently published monograph, one finds a refreshing candor and almost brutal self-criticism that has struck some in the design world as odd. Of course, it's only strange because it is so natural, so real, and ultimately so out of place for designers to be so open about a process that is often fraught with difficulties, negotiations, and compromises. Despite their inherent modesty about their own work and contributions, Mevis and Van Deursen have had an outsized influence on contemporary graphic design, both in the Netherlands and also outside of it, through both their production and their teaching. So please help me welcome Armand Mevis.
Thank you for the introduction. I will speak, it was told to me that I have to speak loud. I don't know if this is loud enough, but I think so. Yeah, it's very unfortunate that Linda is not here today because actually we did a rehearsal together and it worked really fine that we could split the projects and she would talk about half of the projects, I would talk about the others. At least it was an attempt not to get boring, after a while because your voice goes down and then at a certain point everybody falls asleep. So now I have to do it by myself. So we made a selection of projects starting somewhere in 1995 till more recent work. And it will take like 1 hour and 15 minutes, so don't go away after 45 minutes. And you'll know it will end at a certain point. I will start to read something from this book. I will say something about it afterwards as well. But, okay. Restrictions. Someone once said that design is always the product of a lot of restrictions. Charles Eames, I think, or maybe it was Charlie Chaplin, sorry. But that's exactly how it is. You can't overstate the role played by restrictions. But not only the ones that come with the job, I mean the given ones, the content, the budget, the time, your own limits, even the expectations of the client or whoever you're working with. They all restrict you. But I think you have to then introduce a set of extra restrictions based on these, that in a way protect you from them. I think it's here that you in fact find all the decisions you need. The size, the format, whether to use color or only black and white, whether to use images and type or just type. It's a way of setting up rules to the game you're about to play, rules that create the game. And the clearer the rules, the more fun it is, in fact, to play. Because it's not about wanting to be dogmatic or somehow less free. It's the opposite. By knowing what the rules are or the limits, you seem to get a better sense of the possibilities. You react more quickly and you make decisions more easily and effectively. You look for all the possibilities for freedom within those restrictions and you play them out. It might not be so immediately apparent with our work, but I see a lot of similarities with Lars von Trier's Dogma Manifesto, where the game is so clearly defined, or with Alexander Sokorov's film Russian Ark, again a very clear set of restrictions to make a feature-length movie with a single take in a single location. These things really interest me, And to make it work, you have to be not only continually inventive, but to keep an incredibly free mind. Restrictions contribute to a search for a kind of freedom, an openness, or to responses that are looser or unpredictable, so that a kind of living voice is kept alive in the work, somewhere between what you want to do and what you cannot do. I start with a project which we did, I'm not sure anymore, maybe 5-6 years ago. It was actually an Austrian architectural firm who invited us to take part in one of their architecture jobs they did. And it was for a company, a Hong Kong-based company, who had their first company in Europe, and that was in Austria. And it was done in a building which was a former gasometer. It's like a gas tank. So it was like a circular, and the walls needed to be filled with something which would help the sound, that the sound would be a little bit more dimmed. So we knew that there were all these walls, circular walls, where we had to come up with something in a working space where people would sit and could look at. And I think first when they invited us, they were probably hoping for something really visually appealing, something with colors or whatever. But we didn't want to look into that too much, and we thought maybe it's nicer when people work there to come up with a solution that people can think about when they are working. And the funny thing was that the size of the screen, the dimensions, were very similar to the dimensions of the fortune cookies. So we had a fortune cookies on our wall, and we thought like, hey, actually that's a nice size. But we even thought that maybe a sentence as that could even work within a working space. So we started to select 13 fortune cookies text, which we thought were interesting enough to bring there in that space. So I will just show them to you. So this is how it actually was presented. The only thing which we had no control of was the 360 degrees, which was put on top of these walls, because they thought people could never find their way in the building if they would not add that there. While we said, like, if you work there, you just say, hey, I'm sitting at, your mind is filled with new ideas, and then people would probably know where you were. Okay, I move to another project, which we did in 1996. And so it's rather old, but the projects we selected, I think we selected them because I think they seem to be good solutions for within the given context. So I think I will explain every time also a little bit what the context was. This was a day planner for a company in Holland, which is the KPN. It doesn't exist anymore in its same form. It was the former government-owned company for telecommunications and postal services. And every year they had a tradition that they would make a calendar, like an agenda for all their relations, like the people who worked for the company, but also just people who were related to the company. Every time another designer was invited to come up with an interesting typographic solution and to work with expensive materials, so it was kind of a challenge to make such a calendar. When we got the job, we immediately had something like, it would be too easy for us just to look into typography only or just in the material of the cover, and we thought, can we also turn this agenda into a picture book, which is of course a bit difficult to make since you still need to write in it. So then we came with an idea to actually work with images on the flip side or the back side of every page, and that you could actually unfold them and also cover the images. Then the question was, what could the topic be? How could we come up with at least 52 images which are kind of connected to each other? And then we thought, it's actually a very simple idea. If this agenda is only used in an office space, maybe it's nice to show images of what you do if you have a day off. You know, like just you don't have to go to work. And the word for having a day off in Holland, I don't know how you say it here when you have a day off, but the word, well, probably you just say I have a day off, of course. But in Holland we say vrij, and vrij is a very nice word because it actually means free. And I just like that very much because then also being in an office is actually like the opposite. It's like an unfree situation. So normally the day starts very early at 7:30. Also, so we picked images with a sequence of almost like 24 hours, where alarm clock starts at 7:30. But instead of going to work, you just stay in bed. And well, of course, there are no reasons to get up, or at a certain point you get up, you take a shower, you dry your hair, and all these images, they seem like images, you know, you can find everywhere. But at the time that we did this day planner, it was also the time that photographers such as Nan Goldin and Wolfgang Tillmans really became, well, famous or known to us. And also that their language, their photographic language, seemed to fit so well. So the images we picked, we selected, were they came from artists like Nan Goldin and Wolfgang Tillmans and many others, but also Dutch photographers and artists who actually, we selected their images for the gaps we missed, like 24 hours. We needed something in the morning, we needed something during the day, something in the evening. So slowly it became a collection of images of 24 hours. And it was an interesting process because the relationship we had with the KPN was, in a one way, it was very open. We could come up with all these pictures. At the same time, we had many discussions about the kind of images we proposed. For instance, this man here on this picture, he seemed to be a bit depressed. So they said, well, this man is depressed. Can't you bring in an image of a more like a happier person? But for us, it was really, really necessary to represent in a way kind of really daily life. I mean, it's having a day off does also mean that sometimes you cry, sometimes you have unhappy moments or strange moments. So it was just back and forth discussing the amount of images, and when they would, for instance, would say, no, you cannot use this image because everything is gross in the image, then we came back with the same image again and we said, well, actually we really think we need it, you know, otherwise the whole point of what we are doing here is we just missed that point. So I'll just show you some of these images. And that's, of course, the end then, 7:30. It's kind of bleak, but I hope you can still see it. This is a book we did also like 5-6 years ago, 1999, I think. It's F. Den. It was a book for the Dutch Design Institute, and it was edited by Janet Abrams, who is actually now the director of the Design Institute in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And we started to collaborate on this book. She was responsible for the editing of the book, but at a certain point we found out that the topic dealt with innovations in new media, and the images involved in that kind of work were, in our opinion, not very appealing. So we discussed it with her, and we said, actually, we think we need to bring in something which reflects maybe more like a life or people or something else. And at a certain point, we became the image editors of this book. But maybe I'll just flip a bit through it. I think at that time, We also wanted to do this book more in a way as if it was a magazine. So it was very important for us to create a very flexible grid with many different possibilities how it could be used, so that there is a lot of variation in the book, that every page could actually be very different from the other page. The intention was that this book would appear once a year, so the content of this issue was not really connected to the design. It was a very open design system. So here you see like a variation of different things. We always worked within a very like a strict grid, but at the same time you see like how varied that can be. And I will also show some of the examples of the images we actually proposed as being like image parts in the book itself. For instance, the theme of this issue was play, and that play was in the content of the writing of the essays was always about developing new tools in new media for children, how to learn things. And we at the same time thought, can we find something else in, for instance, in art, where people also deal with play, but in a completely different way. So this is, for instance, work by Sharon Lockhart. You probably know her. She's an American photographer, and she did these screen tests with children. They had to imagine a certain part of a film by Truffaut, and they were playing actually that scene. Another photographer made a series of pictures of huts in which children play, but it's the opposite of playing on a computer. It's like being very playful with just constructing huts. So it was just a collection of huts. Another artist we invited, and I will explain a little bit about what he did. For each artist, we had like 8 or 10 pages. So we asked, can you please contribute with something for this book on play? And this artist was Pierre Bismuth, who I consider as a very interesting and very important French artist. His work is very conceptual, and we really wanted him, but he never came up with something. So we had to call him, we had to fax him, we had to get hold of him, and every time he said, well, yes, I would like to do something, but I just have no idea, I don't know what to do. So we had to wait, and the whole book was actually laid out, and we had this section of 8 or 10 pages, and then at a certain point, we got a fax. At that time, people were still sending faxes to each other. So we got a fax, and actually what the fax was just a list of rules for a game he was actually playing with us. So he said, like, for instance, if you are on page 22, you have to do this and this and this. If you are at page 97, you have to do this and this and this. So I don't know if I can read this, but it's very, very hard to read. Maybe I'll flip to another page, because I have another example then. So these are pages, actually, he gave us instructions what to do. This was, for instance, a page where he told us, like, if page 76 is going to be light green, then page 77 has to be dark green. Those kind of instructions. But it completely messed up our whole layout of the whole book. Because it was in the middle of an article, for instance, and the book was partly printed in black and white, and partly it was printed in black and white plus a PMS color, or it was partly full color. So we really worked it out, that everything was exactly in the right position. And then his fax came in, and we really had to completely reschedule the whole book, and that was, of course, a lot of work. I can read this, then you see how it worked. It always started with if, and then if wanting to do something you have never done before, you randomly decide that pages 97, 96, or 97, 98, 185, 186 will be respectively golden yellow, orange, green, and light green. Then it was just a double, I don't know how you say that, double dots. So that's actually, we had to execute these ideas, and it was very nice actually to bring that in the book. I will move to another project. We never were so much involved in identities. We are a very, very small design office. It's just Linda and me, and sometimes we have an assistant. So dealing with identities is a very big demand on your small office, because those jobs, they come and they stay. It's different from a book. A book comes and it goes. So at a certain point, we were invited to take part in a pitch for an identity for the City of Rotterdam, which is the second biggest city in the Netherlands, which was selected to become the cultural capital of Europe together with Porto that year. So, of course, it was a very prestigious job. At the same time, it was nice because it was a pitch, that it was also more like a conceptual job. We could work on an identity without feeling too much responsible of the outcome. We could just see it as a model for what an identity for a city could actually be. There was you can say like a curator who was responsible for the whole program, and he came up with a theme which was Rotterdam is many cities, loosely based on Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities. So he said, well, actually Rotterdam is so many different cities, and because that was the theme, we tried to actually take that as a starting point to come up with an identity. A city is represented with a dot or a square if you look at cartography. So we thought that could be a good starting point. And maybe it shows how we try to make things also really simple. You know, that design, I think, should in a way also be very simple. So you can actually divide the square and the circle into smaller units, and you can create more and more cities, or you could even say more logos, because they were not really interested in having a real logo. They were more interested in kind of a system, a logo system, which at a certain point could be used by all these different cultural institutions within one city, where many, many different designers would work with this identity. So what we had to create was much more of a toolbox than a finished design. So this was, if you started combining these forms and shapes, you can create even more logos. So there was this endless possibility of creating logos, and even by adding three colors, you could even use the colors to change them. Then we had another problem. Like, we could not just give these logos to the people and say, these are the logos, just do something with them. We had to come up with a plan which could hold all the information of that year together. And we had no idea how to do that, but at a certain point it was just very simple. We thought, like, why, if not all printed matter is connected with it through something like a banner or a small line, something which actually, if you put everything next to each other, like a business card with a poster, that this line would continuously connect everything, and if the information in that line is actually documenting what was happening, then you can also say it becomes like a timeline of a whole year of events. So that was also a nice idea to work with, but on the other hand, we already had these logos. So how to bring those two things together? That was, I think, the moment that we really had a tough time solving, as a designer, those two things you want to do. So how we solved it was actually by making the line, giving it a certain height. It could never change. This height was always, well, in millimeters, it's 33. It's like, I don't know, maybe 2 inches. And every 54 millimeters, which is like maybe 3.5 inch, there would be this vertical line, which we thought is actually like something like a timeline. You know, it makes you aware that time passes. And within this structure, you could actually divide it in a smaller grid system, and the blocks and the units and the circles and everything could start to work. And you could also use it for instance, like the typography, how to bring that in, the different sizes. Everything can actually be defined within this system, and it becomes like this toolbox other designers could start to use. So bringing in the former things like color, blocks, but also pictures, typography, it was possible to create also like an endless variation of lines within this system. So these are just some samples from like what we just did as a manual for you to show. And here the funny thing was, well, it's not really funny, but it was more that we were really surprised that they selected us, because we were not prepared to do it. Yeah, I mean, the first thing they said when we got the job was they first thought that we were going to be very rich, You know, oh, the people who worked there said like, oh, now you're going to be very, very rich because you get all these assignments. And we were only like worried, you know, like, geez, how to handle all this kind of work. And I think in a way, probably finally, we failed a bit in this whole assignment, because I think we were able to give the rules, to give the things, and to work in a way, or to actually design the letterheads and all the things. But from the moment that they started to work with all these different designers, I think you need somebody who is actually like a design director, you know, looking into that material, always talking about it. And in a way, we just couldn't do that. It was too much. And I think in that sense, probably we failed a little bit because we were just too small as a studio, and we could not really hold, or you said it, have grip on the whole amount of things they were producing. So we also saw horrible solutions by other designers, where they started flipping the logo, make it three-dimensional, and completely didn't understand what this was all about. I show you just two the posters which were done as the launch of the new identity. So in the top of the poster, you see exactly how this small line runs actually on top of the poster, and you see the elements which we used for this identity, like the basic elements and the basic three colors. And for instance, this is done by another designer, which I actually think is a nice solution, where you see this line on top of the design, but at the same time you also see that the design itself speaks a different language. But I think here it really works well. And this was maybe not a good example, but it was the poster. We cut the poster, and it was folded and it was stitched, and it became something like a folder to hold press releases, things like that. So I can't show too many good examples, so it's kind of limited. Then I will talk about something else. Because we do more publication design or book design, we selected a few books of which we think maybe it's nice to speak a little bit about those. One of the books was done for the artist Carlos Amorales. He's a Mexican artist who lived at that time in Amsterdam. Now he is living in Mexico City. And his work was actually that he had these performances where Mexican fighters were fighting against each other, but they were wearing a mask, and the mask was actually a portrait of the artist. So you see here two boys with this mask. He came to us and he had a whole set of images of, more like behind the scenes of actually his work. So how he actually got acquainted to the fighters, how he went to the mask maker to make this mask for him. And we thought it was a really interesting story, and we thought it needed some kind of text. So we asked him, could you please write down, a story that we understand what these images are and what they actually try to say. And then it took him a very, very long time to write something, and at a certain point said, I can't do it. It's just, I'm not a writer, I can't write. I only have this, like 2 pages of text, that's the only thing I could write. And then when we were looking at it, we thought, actually it's not so bad. If you just look at the text and take small parts out of it, it becomes like the story, a chronological story of him meeting the fighters, meeting the mask maker, and actually you can use that text throughout the whole book. So we cut it in parts, and actually every time connected to the images, and it starts to make sense with the images. So if you start reading this and you flip from page to page, you actually start understanding what his work is about. And I think that's a very nice way of on one hand, bringing a story and connecting it to the images. And it reads like a story, so you can really read from page to page, and the story continues. He was actually a lousy wrestling manager. He had many difficulties with the fighters. They just didn't understood what he was actually managing for them. because finally they performed in, for instance, Centre Pompidou, where they had organized a fight, but also in other places, like Tijuana. Now I'll speak about another book, which we actually did quite recently. This is done last year. And it's a book for a Dutch photographer, Geert van Kesteren, who is not an artist, but he's like a journalistic photographer. His images appear in magazines like Newsweek. And he worked for 1 year as an embedded journalist or photographer in Iraq, following the Americans in their attempt to actually, well, I don't know what to do there in Iraq, but at least he was there as well. First, there was a publisher involved who called us up and said, well, do you know Geert van Kesteren? And we actually didn't know him. And he said, well, I want to make this book. And he made some images. So first, the publisher came to us and showed us maybe like 60 images. And he said, well, I think that these 60 images could actually become the book. Just a good selection of images. At the same time, we thought like, these images were kind of interesting, but at the same time, if you look at the images as being like beautiful compositions or whatever, I think that is not the images. That is not the photography he's doing. So you cannot show his work by only showing 60 images. So we said, is there not more? Can we see more images? And they said, well, contact the photographer. And then we did that. We went there, and then the photographer showed us like hundreds or maybe even almost like 1,000 images of his whole presence in Iraq. And then the way he spoke about it and the way he showed us these images, it was almost like a film. Every image was following by the other image, so it was really like a sequence of images. And it was no longer about this one image, this beautiful image, but it was so much more about an involvement in where he was and how he saw his things. So while we were there, we thought, well, this needs a complete different book. We just need to make a book which actually can be connected to that kind of attitude, that he's moving with his camera, seeing things. So we proposed that this book could actually contain a few hundred images, and that the book, I think it has something like 600 pages, so like 300 images, which represents something of the work he was doing there. And the book is divided in different sections, where one big section is about about the graveyards. Another section is about the raids by the Americans, and it became a very critical book towards the American presence in Iraq. This is, for instance, like an image of the UN being bombed. So I just show you some of these pages. And at the same time, he also wrote small pieces of text, actually describing a little bit what was happening there. And we said to him, we think it's a bit weird to make this book, and actually that only people in Western countries can read it. So is it not important that we actually also make like a translation in Arabic, and that this book can also be sold in Arabic countries? So finally, his text was translated as well. But I cannot, like here. So you could read the book from the back to forth, and from the beginning to the end. So like two reading ways. And at the same time, we thought the book should be a little bit small. And since his work dealt so much with images for magazines like Newsweek, we picked this very, very thin paper, and we gave it a rough cut, which is actually most of the time done to glue a book. So whenever you make a magazine, they have this rough cut, then they put the glue there, and then they cover it up with a cover. But if you have the rough cut on the edges, it gives a nice kind of sensibility to the book as well. So I will just show you some of these images that you get some kind of notion of what this book was like. It was not so big, a little bit like this. And because it was small, it was possible to print many pages out of one sheet, and actually to get this book with so many pages. So this is really like page after page after page. So here you really see what the sequence was. And then sometimes these pieces of text appeared with his story and the Arabic translation. And I think it was for us also interesting because we deal so much with artists and art, and not so much with things that seems to be sometimes so much more important, things which are maybe more connected to real life, although art is of course also part of real life. That for us it was also like, in a way, nice to escape maybe, at least with this book from the art world. Although we like it a lot, of course, to be in there, but at the same time, it's sometimes nice that you have a complete different focus. Okay, now I'll speak about something else. It's actually a really small project, but at the same time, I also like it because there's some kind of irony in it, and it's a small project which took us a lot of energy actually to come up with a good solution. So I will just tell you what it was. An exhibition was organized in the Dutch Architectural Institute, where designers were shown, like 3D designers, furniture designers, photographers, fashion, and they hired an architectural firm to come up with the solution for the presentation of the works. The architects came up with a plan to actually hang everything on ropes on some kind of a rail system, and everything was rotating through the space. So there was a huge space and everything was moving. And we got this job to come up with a solution for the captions. And actually, I was not immediately attracted by the job because they would also work on a catalog, but the catalog was done by Job van Bennekom, who is a Dutch designer who I really like. So he got to do the catalog, which is of course the nice job, and we had to deal with the captions, which is the horrible job. At the same time, I thought, okay, because I think that maybe shows a little bit the attitude we have. Even when an assignment really seems to be very unattractive, then I think you just have to sit down and see how it can become an attractive job. So I was also challenged by the fact that all these designers who were in this show were really came up with smart and ironical solutions. So I thought, can we come up with an equivalent of this kind of design which is shown with these captions? So it was finally, of course, it's so simple, but it took us so much time to come up with it. It became actually this catalog, which we didn't do. And we just made the catalog, and then we cut it off 2 inches from the spine. And of course, it was a fake catalog, because the real catalog was still there. But everybody who actually went in the exhibition got this little book, which contained all the captions. And, it's too hard to make a picture of it, because it closes immediately when you have your camera ready. It's closed again. And of course, we played a little bit with the fact that it was cut off. So on the edges, the type is really very, very close to the cut, so that you really think it's almost irritating. And we also put there small pieces of images sometimes that you only had 4 or 5 millimeters of an image, which you could not see. And then there were always, because you think how does this work? But it worked because there were small numbers on each page, and at the same time the numbers were at the object, so you could easily find your way, and you could actually hold the book and you could read the captions in this book, and that was the solution. So just a small project. Another project I'd like to talk about is because most of the time when we deal with a book, we actually never touch the type. And this was maybe the first time that you can actually say that you zoom in. It was for an exhibition and a group show with the title The Larsen Effect. To make that clear what it is, that is kind of a feedback. What you get when you put a microphone too close to a speaker, you get this kind of disturbance. So we thought, okay, if the relationship between all the artworks is that this disturbance or this kind of can create some kind of an artwork as well, where actually when you have, for instance, some kind of, well, Simon Starling, for instance, was in the show. He actually won the Turner Prize last year. He made, for instance, like a boat, and then the boat was, I think, burnt, and then all the artifacts of that burned boat were displayed in the exhibition room. So you understand that from one existing boat, you burn it down, and then you present only like the burnt pieces. So that was kind of the artworks involved in this catalog. At the same time, it was a show which traveled from Luxembourg to Austria, so it had to be 3 languages, French, German, and English. So that's why you see 3 languages on one cover. But what I want to talk about is actually what we did here. We tried to find an equivalent of this kind of disturbance, and it's explained in the beginning of the book. The whole typography is typeset with an existing letter font. We are not font designers at all. I really don't know how to design a font, because you need some kind of software, and we are not so good in learning all the software programs. So I also didn't want to touch it, but we just had like a very simple idea. If we open up Fontographer and you see a font, you can easily change the font by saying, okay, can you make it thinner? And then in steps you can go from very thin to very bold, so from A to Z. And by doing that and starting to type and to typeset it with that kind of text, you get this disturbance in the whole book actually. So of course it's you have to bit to fantasize about how that works, because probably you cannot see it really well, but you understand probably what the effect of that could be in type. At the same time, we thought it's nice that there were 3 languages, that everything was repeated 3 times, that everything was a bit like too much, like all the information was always there 3 times, and page numbers appear 3 times on the page. Now I talk about something else, which is also an identity we proposed, but it was never executed. It was also part of a pitch for a school in Venice, Italy. The School for Architecture, it's called IUAV, Internazionale Universitaire Architettura Venezia, something like that. My Italian is not so good, but since we were asked, and it was also a pitch, it felt also a bit like uncomfortable that they probably had no money to fly us over, to introduce us to the people and to talk about the project. So they said, it's a pitch, we want you to come up with a solution. Here are some brochures, this is who we are, and please do something. So it felt something like, yeah, probably we will never get the job anyway. So why don't we do it in a way that at least it's something we want to do. It's also interesting for us to do. And there was something hovering in our minds already for a long time. Well, actually the question was, can you make a design or can you make a typeface which consists of 26 different fonts and that you can start typing with it? Because we are no type designers, we also don't have to worry about how that actually could work. If there's a program who could actually do it. But it's like a nice idea to think of. So we contacted a Dutch type designer, Peter Bilak, to ask if it was possible. And he said, well, I think it's really difficult. You know, maybe in open font something is possible, but not with 26, probably never it's going to work. So I think you have to bring it down to a smaller amount of fonts. And he said, well, probably nobody in Holland is able to program it, but maybe in America you have very good programmers, maybe they can do it. So first we thought, okay, let's just make this identity in the way we think it should function. And later on, if it maybe will be picked, we can always deal with the solutions how to get it done. The whole identity consisted of 8 fonts, and we picked 8 fonts which we thought is like a representation of font history. I mean, don't go too deep into it. It was more like a selection of nice-looking fonts from serif to sans serif. At the same time, all these fonts, of course, have a different height, a different X height, a different height in caps. So to get a real, more like a regular typeface, we asked Peter Bilak if he could modify all these typefaces. That, for instance, like all the X heights and all the capitals became like regular, that you could actually start typing with it. So this is typeface how it looks when you just put it on a page, and it looks in a way kind of ugly. But as soon as you start typing with it, it becomes something like an identity. And well, maybe it's a stupid comment, but when we had to present this, we had to write a little letter with it. We also compared it actually with like a street with all these different houses. You know, every house is different, but at the same time. So that was more like a blah blah thing. But you know, you can imagine that it helps maybe people to convince. So the thing was that every time when you would type, it could never have two fonts of the same font next to each other. So it could pick randomly fonts, but never like twice, for instance, the Accidents or the Bauhaus or whatever. And the good thing was also, because I think that is maybe how we think about the identity if you compare it back with Rotterdam, that I think making more like a system is maybe more interesting than making like a logo and then you have to deal with the other things, but you never know how to connect them. So the good thing, of course, was that its EUAV could appear in all these different variations. So I think there are like a few thousand possibilities or maybe 1,000 possibilities. So this logo is actually never the same. So it's kind of very dynamic. So here you see just a few examples being blown up. And this is what you get if you start typing the name connected to what they are and where they are located, where we also thought you don't need to do so much with it anymore. Just type it, put it there. Only do it in black and white. Never use color for the type. That makes it maybe too complicated. And maybe use gray tones to make some information more prominent than the other. And also work with different sizes to make the most prominent information more bigger than of course, the smaller or the less important information. And these are just some of the things we showed them to convince them that this was really right for them. And of course the question is then, what do you do with running text? And then we thought, well, you could probably never use this typeface for long pieces of text. But since we have this set of 8 type fonts, actually every time you can choose one of these 8, or within one page you can work with the different typefaces at the same time. So you have a selection of 8 fonts and you can use it for all the things they were using. So here you see an example of, for instance, like a headline with some kind of spec type. But it was never chosen, so that was unfortunate for us. But maybe also good, because we are so small, you know, it's also, of course, also like the Rotterdam thing, we had that experience. So at a certain point, you can also say, well, you send it over, and on one hand, you hope that it's picked, and the other hand, it's really like a big relief that it was not selected. Like, you know, how are we going to manage with that kind of client in Italy? We don't speak Italian, Italians don't speak English, so that didn't happen finally. Then I will talk about something else we are involved in, and that is actually the design for a museum in Holland, which is Museum Boijmans van Beuningen. And well, it's a different museum than the Walker Art Center. First, it's well, maybe in size it's maybe as big, but it's at least not as varied as the Walker, where there is also like a part of a theater, and so this is really like a museum where they show where they have a huge collection of 17th century paintings. They have, but also like ceramics, even from the Roman time, to contemporary art. So it's a very mixed museum. The museum built a new wing, which is this wing built by the architects Robrecht and Daams, Belgian architects. At that time, the director of the museum, he left because he got a job in Munich, and they were actually just in between 2 directors. At the same time, they had this opening of this building, and the chief curator contacted us and asked us if we would like to do the design for the museum. Since the museum was called Boijmans, who was a former collector in the 19th century, and Van Beuningen was a collector in the, I think somewhere during the war, they both donated their collections to the museum. So that's also why this museum is so different. They have very like a strange combination of collections. And we thought of it in a very simple way. Well, you have Boijmans, you have Beuningen. They both have a name with B, so we both give them a B, and we put the B's in. We combine the B's, and you get actually another B. So it was a very simple idea, and then we thought, well, actually, if we have this B, I think it should be part of. It should not be a logo by itself, but it should become part of a font. So what we had to do then was museum was the font we needed. We needed a triple line font. And we were looking in different fonts in a letter-set book, old books, and there are very funny fonts and many fonts you really don't like. At a certain point, we saw this font designed by Lance Wyman, who did the identity for Mexican Olympics in 1968. And of course, that purpose of that typeface had nothing to do with the purpose we wanted to use it for. So we were looking in that typeface, and it only consisted of a triple-line font, but only like a lowercase font. I don't know how you call it, like more like a Unicode font, I think. It's kind of a combination of capitals and lowercase. So we thought, if we need this font, first it didn't exist digitally, so it had to be redrawn. At the same time, we thought, well, we needed also a one-line version, and a two-line version, and a three-line version. And we would like to have a capital version instead of only having the lowercase version. So we started to work with a type designer who was actually my student at the Werkplaats Typografie, where I teach. And he was Radim Pesko, a Czech student, who just did a few typefaces in the 2 months that he was already there. I thought, wow, this guy is really fast, He can do a typeface in a couple of weeks. And we needed, of course, to present our proposal to the museum also within a short amount of time. So we contacted him and we asked him, can you actually help us designing this typeface? So first he took, of course, the existing typeface, but from then on, we made like a selection of, I think, like 7 different variations, from very thin to very bold, where actually the thinnest line in the typeface is also the thinnest space between, for instance, if you look at the P, like the white lines inside are as thin as, for instance, the N, which is like the thinnest line. I will show you extensively all these fonts that you know that they really exist, but there are many, so I'll just flip through it a bit quickly. The resolution is it's a bit rough, but I think you can see what it is. So it goes from light to regular. It's a bit slow, but. And by having this typeface, so you also see here the original lowercase font, how we actually went from there to a capital version, also because we thought that the museum should not be represented by this more funnier typeface. It seemed not to be too serious enough for the museum we had in mind. And we thought, whenever we have this typeface already, that is the identity for the museum. So you don't have to do so much anymore with the type, because it's so strong in its identity, I think. Okay, well, we're almost done. A little patience. Okay, ultra black. So you get a collection or a set of typefaces which can be used for many different things. And the last version is actually the block version, where there are no white lines in there anymore. These are some kind of the things we had to develop as well for the signage system of the museum. I don't like the girl, the man and the women, but I think it's a bit dated, this squirt. And also, when you have this idea of the 2 Bs, you can also start to vary on the possibilities of the bees and the colors, and to work. So actually also you can make a collection of bees, which is in a way kind of endlessly. And these could be used, for instance, for bags, for, I don't know, for the things where you say, well, here we only need a logo and not like the whole full name. And then I'll show you different examples of the things which are actually executed for the museum. And we did this I think we started like 3 years ago on this, and we still work on it today. Sorry, it takes a bit of time because this image which is coming is a bit heavy. This is the wrapping paper. Oops. Sorry. Well, I can have a drink. Sorry. Okay. Move to the next one. This was the placemat in the restaurant, just a detail from it. This was the box, which is like a triangle box for the posters. So just like every line is actually one side of the box. I don't know if you can see it well, but these were two proposals for the book with the collection of the museum. These are covers for the program they bring out twice a year. They have a little booklet with all the events happening. This was a billboard for the museum. This was a design for one of the first exhibitions we had to deal with. And then maybe to explain that to you, we made a division between actually the typeface for the museum was only used for all the information related to the museum, like the address, opening times, things like that. But every time the exhibition itself could be designed in a completely different way. So every time for each exhibition we chose one typeface and we used it for the poster, for the invitation. These are two invitation cards. So there can be a big variety on invitation cards. This was the back side of a poster for Fischli & Weiss, and that was actually the front side of an invitation for Fischli & Weiss. Again, two more invitation cards. We also had to work on the signage for the museum. So for the entrance, we used the type again, and this is how the typeface would be used on the walls to guide people through the museum. Then we came up with a solution for actually to announce all the exhibitions in the museum. When you would enter and you come to the place where you buy your ticket, there is this wall, and we wanted to actually announce all the exhibitions more in a way as if it's the content page of the museum. So we fixed like four different sizes of panels, which could be loosely placed against the wall. And every time this panel, within a certain set of rules, had to be filled with type only. And the typeface was every time connected to the typeface we were using for the invitation card. So every exhibition got this kind of identity. And whenever you would walk through the museum, this panel, which was placed vertically against the wall, would appear again, like twice, so once at the entrance and once at another place, which was actually the entrance of the exhibition. This was another time, but I don't like this picture so much. And sometimes we are not doing the typesetting of these. Sometimes they have even exhibitions without an invitation card. So then the people within the museum, they pick their own typeface and they actually follow our rules. But I don't think they always are able to make a good board, but anyway. And I think they also misplace it a little bit. But here you see how it works. Okay, I move to something completely different. I think this is probably a very different client for us. It's for a fashion label. Viktor and Rolf, you probably know them. They are two Dutch fashion designers who started out, I think, like 10 years ago, and slowly moved from being a very small Dutch fashion designers into they really wanted to deal with to become a real fashion label such as Gucci or Versace, or so slowly they built their careers, and I show you just some of their work, which was shown in Paris, I think like 2 years ago. And we have been working for them, I think, for maybe 6 or 7 years. And we actually started out doing a catalog for them because there was a publisher who was interested in making a book for them. So we started doing this catalog and worked on it for them. And then after it was done, they said, well, actually, maybe we also need a logo. Can you also do that? And we just have finished this book, and the book was completely black. We could only come up with something really simple, which was actually just like a black seal. We thought it should always be black, and we imagined that it would be so nice that you have a coat, and then you can actually, the tags or the things, you could just glue it with this kind of seal. So that was what we proposed to them, and they were immediately like, yeah, we like that, and we can actually use it. So we finished this logo rather quickly. It was also at a time that we never considered this as a real project. Because it was so much like a fluent thing where we did the catalog first, and then, at a certain point they ask you, like, can you also look into the cover, into a logo? They were not Gucci at that time. They were like smaller, so it felt almost like a very friendly thing to do for each other. So I think that maybe that was probably the reason why it could actually be done. I think if they would have looked into logos now, then they probably would hire a very big international name, and then there should be a whole kind of marketing research before the logo could actually be used. But this was really like very nice to do it in a very simple, naive way, and we all liked it, and it's still used, so that's really nice. And now we see people wearing it on their shirts, or you see it different places. And the limitation, in a way, is that it's kind of expensive to put the logo on printed matter, because you always need this kind of emboss, and you need to have this kind of foil print. So in a way, we have this one how to say that? This one metal model. I don't know how you call it, but it's something like a template, and it's actually used all over the things they have. So the logo appears in a way in all printed matter, always in its equal size. So whenever it's a small book, for instance, these are the books for the lookbooks where they present their show each half year. The white one is for women, and black is for men, and it always has the same kind of size. And also for the invitation cards, it's always placed in the right upper corner, and the invitations for the shows are just imprinted as if it's a letterhead. So you just see some of these examples. And they're actually kind of becoming really big at the same time. What we do for them is really like just small things like invitations. They don't deal so much with printed matter. They don't need too much printed matter. At least at this time, they don't need it. So maybe that will change in the future. I will talk about this more because they launched a perfume, which is Flower Bomb, the perfume which is launched maybe 1.5 year ago, 1 year ago. And before they introduced it officially, they had something like a show in Paris where they already had the fragrance. So you could already smell it, but it was not available then. And they asked us, well, can you come up with a very because the name was a bit inspired by. They had something like 1,000 flowers, so it was the smell of 1,000 flowers. So they also had something like, can you come up with something which is very loose and very like, something. And then we thought, like, how can we do that? And then we thought maybe it's nice that every invitation card actually is different, and maybe since we both teach, we thought we can turn it into kind of a workshop, into kind of a project where each student would get, for instance, like 10 original letterheads. And then they had to write all the information or had to draw all the information on each invitation. And of course, that's very funny because then they all start to make crazy things and everything is going to be different. And of course, there were also invitations which were not so nice and other ones were really nice. And also Viktor and Rolf at a certain point, because they knew also some of the people very well where they were going to send out their invitations to. So they said, well, give us also some, because we make our own drawings as well. So that will appear at some point where you see that they actually say, well, I hope you will come, Viktor and Rolf, or something like that. They're kind of hard to see here. Well, this is it has to do a little bit with the contrast, which is a bit too high, maybe still. And we all scanned them in because they thought, like, well, since it's all sent out, then you never have any kind of copies anymore. And I think that's really what I like also maybe about Viktor and Rolf. They present themselves, of course, very seriously in this world of fashion. At the same time, I always have the feeling that they play the game more than they are the game. I don't know if that's a bit clear, but they want to be these fashion designers with this big label, and at the same time everything they did in their career was only working towards that kind of fame, to that kind of thing. So in that sense I think there's always some kind of irony in the way how they present themselves as being the fashion designers Viktor and Rolf. And therefore I think they also still like to do these kind of things which probably most other fashion labels would never do. Like here, this is done saying in the bottom, see you then, lots of love, Viktor and Rolf. So these are the two designs they made for their friends. It's a little bit much, but I'll just go through it, sorry. This was the last one. This one actually... But this one is actually very nice because we also, because we had not enough students, we also contacted a school in Switzerland where Cornel Windlin was teaching, and we asked him also if his students could also do some of these invitations. And this one was done by Cornel Windlin, which is one of the better ones, I think. This is something which was connected to this exhibition in Paris. When we spoke to them for their first book, the Black Book, which is like 6 years ago, they wanted to put clippings in that book. But in some way we didn't know how to combine the clippings with the other work. So we spoke about it and finally the clippings were not used. 5 years later, they had this show and they said, well, we still would like to do something with all these clippings we have. And we were looking into them, and at the same time, there was also a publisher who was publishing a magazine which was called A, B, C, D, E. Every time a new issue was made by another fashion designer. So this was issue number E. And he said, well, actually, I want to do a magazine on Viktor and Rolf where they become like the editors. And so two things came together. Either Viktor and Rolf wanted to work with the clippings, and there was this question of the publisher. And in a way, we actually didn't think that we had to do so much about it. So we said, yeah, we think it's a great idea, and maybe we should just start using all these clippings. And actually, there were maybe like 700 or 800 clippings. It was not possible to make a magazine with 800 pages, but at least a magazine with 400 pages. So it's like a selection of 400 different clippings, chronologically organized within the magazine. And I think what is really nice, if you see it, it's like of an unedited documentation of how Viktor and Rolf every time were interpreted by other stylists, photographers, when they started out, they had just little articles in magazines, and slowly they moved from smaller magazines in slightly bigger magazines, alternative magazines, Dutch magazines, and of course finally also they were on the cover of Vogue, and so it becomes like you can really follow how they develop themselves in their career, because it covered actually almost like 8 or 10 years of Viktor and Rolf. And as a designer, I think, on one hand, of course, it's really nice if they say, well, can you actually make a magazine for us? Or on the other hand, I mean, it was such a great idea just to edit actually all these pages from existing magazines that we didn't feel that there was any design needed. So it's also nice to think about design, or being a designer, that you can actually just do what needs to be done in a really good way, but at the same time, don't mess it up, in a design way. So we are very much like here, more like partly editing the pages and not really designing the pages. So I will just flip through it, and then you get the sense of what it is. And then you see this image, and then on the next page you see also how it appears, the same image again in a Russian magazine. So. I'm not showing 400 pages, don't worry. Okay, now we move actually to the last project. I would like to tell something about it. Last year, well, just to maybe to tell how it actually existed. Like 4 years ago, we were at a certain point asked by a Dutch publisher, Bies, if we would like to make our own monograph. It felt like an honorable thing to do. At the same time, we also felt very insecure, like. To make a book on your own work, I think, is really the most difficult thing to do. So we actually never thought too much about it anymore after this invitation came. We never proposed an idea for it. We never spoke to the publisher again, and we just let it fall out of our hands. It also felt a bit like if you make a book on your work, you have these monographs which are really great. Like for instance, the book on Karel Martens, who is also working at the Werkplaats where I teach. I think maybe you don't know the book, but it's really like one of these books of which you think like it's a great monograph. In the way it's designed, that it has some kind of completeness in it, it explains the work. But it seems also to fit with a designer who is maybe like, well, I don't want to say at the end of his career, but at least he's like mid-60s when he did this book, and it covers a whole like era of graphic design from mid-60s to now. And we felt we were not ready for that kind of a book. We could not do a book like that, but we also had no other idea about what to do for a book. So 3 years later, we got an invitation from the Japanese magazine Idea Magazine to make a contribution of 64 pages in their magazine. And we thought, like, what can you do? What can you tell about your work without actually explaining all the work? Especially for a magazine, maybe like Idea Magazine, they never deal so much with text. So it's a very like image-based magazine, I think. So then we thought maybe it's possible to say something about your work if you just look at like the outside of the work, like the language. Because of course our work is connected maybe by its ideas and its concepts. On the other hand, you can also say the work is connected through its visual language. So why not only look at images and at our work from this kind of notion that it's also a visual activity, being a designer. And because it was a magazine, it also didn't feel too much as a pressure that it had to be like this, huge thing where you present yourselves. We wanted to look at it as if it was also a bit easy, So we came up with this concept to actually make collages of our work and show those collages in the magazine. What I show now is not the magazine, but the book. But every time each page or each picture consisted of 3 elements. It was always like a poster in the back, something like a book or a publication or something bigger on top of the poster, and something smaller even on top of that, like a smaller invitation card or something else. Sometimes there were even 4 things in the picture, or 5, or sometimes 2. Just it depended a little bit. But we were able to actually create some kind of a visual story about our work and actually mix all the work from last 10 or 15 years where we didn't have to worry too much about chronology, and but at the same time we saw it also as that it could be like a new work, like the images in itself. And then when it was done, we had this show in Japan last year, April, at DDD Gallery in Osaka, and we thought actually it would be so nice if we already have 64 images, if we could just continue working on it and maybe turn it into a book of maybe 200 pages. So we were looking for funding. So partly we found some money. Partly we invested also something of our own money. There was a publisher involved. The publisher also invested some money. So finally we were able to make this book. I think what came out of it is it's kind of a strange book. It's in a way very much criticized by, I think, maybe design critics who are completely disappointed that this book doesn't show anything. At least that's what probably is what they think. At the same time, I think it does show a lot of things. It does show our work, but it shows it in a different way. These are no pages for the book, but these are like zoomed in pages. Also, we never thought about that the book should contain some text, but at the same time we know Paul Ellerman very well, and he said, well, I really would like to write a piece on you. And he said, can I write about your relationship with your clients? And I was immediately very negative. I thought like, oh no, we should not do that. I mean, as soon as we start talking about our clients, I mean, I didn't do it tonight, not too much, but it's going to be one big complaint, you know, like all the things you want to do, all the things you can never do, the people you hate, you know, so we should not do that. But Linda was really positive. So we were sitting there with the 3 of us in a bar in Amsterdam. Linda very positive, I'm very negative, and it's never nice to be in this negative role because you're the one who is actually blocking things, making things not possible. So I thought, okay, Linda likes it, Paul wants it, I'll just go ahead, you know, and we'll see what happens. So Paul came to us for maybe 2 or 3 days, and he interviewed us, and he asked just very loosely, like, okay, tell something about Viktor Rolf, or tell something about Museum Boijmans van Beuningen. And then we just started talking. And I think the nice thing about the text, and well, I read something of this text, is that whenever you start reading it, you probably think you hear me or you hear Linda speaking. But the nice thing is that you never know who is speaking. And at the same time, if you read it, we know that you also hear Paul speaking. I think that the speed of the text is really much Paul's text. There is so much speed in this text that it's not edited down. It's not presented as polishing the text, that it becomes like a real nice story. There are repetitions, like I'm repeating myself now, like it, you know, all these things are still part of the text, and I think that makes the text really lively. But at the same time, it is a big complaint. So we are very honest and very open about the relationship we have with clients, and we also, of course, had some clients who were not very happy with when the book came out because they didn't recognize them in the text. But that's, of course, you always have these different voices where we actually interpreted a situation in a way which is probably differently interpreted by a commissioner who maybe never thought that the commissioner was so difficult to us. But for us, we had this kind of memory that it was a real difficult process, and so. But it would be nice if you could maybe get hold of it or read it. The unfortunate thing is that this book is published then by Artimo. Artimo is also the publisher of Geert van Kesteren book, of the Carlos Amarales book. Actually a very, very nice and good publisher in Holland. Maybe a publisher who published books which could never be published by any other publishing house, because they, in a way, they really give you all the space to come up with a concept for a book, but they got bankrupt. So now the book is there, but it's behind chains. We cannot get hold of it. So the book is, I don't know what is going to happen. We still have to solve that problem. Maybe we even have to buy our own books back and then actually sell it again, maybe to a publisher or distributor. I don't know how to do that. And we have not really looked into it yet. But if you would like to buy the book now and you would like to order it on email, it would probably say out of stock. But it's still there, but you just can't get hold of it. Which is a very sad thing, I think. But yeah, what to do about it? So this is actually the end of my story. And well, thank you for listening. So you have to, if you speak, you have to speak louder.
Who were you quoting in the beginning of your presentation? I assume that was out of your.
Oh, that was actually that was our own text. So this was part of the interview Paul did with us, because at a certain point when he interviewed us, and it was only dealing with clients, I really still felt a little bit uncomfortable. So I really asked Paul, I think we should really talk about a few issues which are not being discussed yet, which dealt, for instance, with the part how restrictions are so much part of our work, or for instance, how you are always looking for something new. So there were in this book are still small pieces of text which deal with other things than just our relationship with clients. So I was just reading out something which Linda and I both have said in this interview. Yes.
You mentioned several times that you're a very small shop. I'm wondering.
Yeah.
How conscious of a decision has that been? Or how conscious of a decision has that been to be a small shop?
It's
have you ever thought about being bigger and why?
No, it's of course, you can say on one hand, yeah, I think we are a bit afraid of becoming a big studio. On one hand, because, well, I know that Linda and we are very bad business people. You know, we have very much difficulties of organizing ourselves as a company, and like also who is doing what. You know, we both don't like to send out, you know, an invoice or things like that. So we need to do it, of course. But so whenever a client came, like Rotterdam, you have these chances to become a bigger studio, because you can, of course, make a contract and actually tell them that they have to do everything with you, and you can hire a few designers who are actually on top of that project, and we become more like creative directors of it. At the same time, we are so worried about it, also like that you have people working for you all the time and that you have to deal with them, that we never took the chance of organizing ourselves in that way. And I think in that sense, it's probably a very conscious decision. Also because you want to be involved in the design itself, because you also find out that something can only become really good, I think, when you really deal with it yourself, because you're completely dedicated to work for someone and to come up with a solution which can only work if you're able to translate your content, your idea, into a visual form, and that they both work together. And I think whenever you work with somebody else, of course, there is also this other person who comes in, who also brings in some kind of ideas, and I have all respect for all these designers, but as soon as it is our work, I just would like to do it myself. So, and we are still able to do it as small as we are, with just the two of us and one or two people assisting us now and then. And I just don't know what would happen if slowly we don't do maybe 5 books a year, but for instance maybe 10 or 15. I just don't know what to do. I don't know if we should do it, or I don't know if we can do that. Luckily, we don't get questions for 15 books. You know, it just it doesn't happen. You can also say that our work is very outspoken, but it's also very known in Holland. So since we do it so long, there are always people who like us and who wants to work with us. But of course, there are also many, much more people who don't like us and who don't want to work with us. So that limits the amount of clients you have. And Holland is a very small country, and our work hardly gets, we hardly work international. Actually, I think maybe 90% of our work is just done within Holland. So since it's such a small country, there's also a limit in the people you can work for. So in a way, I think we could never even grow into a big company, or we should start to do other kinds of design. So we should change our attitude, I think. Yes, please.
Just speak a little bit about your teaching role at Werkplaats.
Well, yeah, I mean, for people who don't know Werkplaats Typografie, Werkplaats Typografie is like a small graduate program in Arnhem, which is actually started as a school founded by Karel Martens and Wigga Bierma, an older generation of designers. And I became involved like 3 years ago. And it's a very small school, which is more like an experimental school because it's in between a studio and in between a school. We only have every year 7 students who come in, and the way I see the school is more that it's a place in between school and starting your own practice. So we offer space, we offer of course guidance, we bring our experience in the building. At the same time, we want people to be completely responsible for the work they do. I mean, Linda and I are also involved at Yale, where we teach every year for 2 weeks. Linda 2 weeks and I 2 weeks. And the program there for MFA is so much more strict. So compared to, I think, American education, the school in Holland is you can hardly say that there is a program. But in a way, I'm conscious of that, and I stimulate that idea. I really like it that a school can actually be like an open space where we bring in these different people. Some people don't even have a background in graphic design. They have a completely different background, but they have this. They really want to become a designer. And as soon as their motivation is right, and you think that there is a possibility for them to do work, we accept them. So there's a strange mixture of people, and I just like to see what happens. And sometimes, of course, you make a mistake. Somebody comes in and doesn't feel happy there because there's no strict program. It's asking like, can't you give an assignment? And we say, well, actually, you don't give assignments. So you have to, because also if you start your own studio, come on, nobody is giving you a fake assignment. You have to look for real assignments as well. So if this is a situation between school and practical work, you also can think about your responsibility of getting in touch with people, trying to get assignments, and if you don't get them, to think about what you can do and make an interesting project for yourself. And we are there just to help them, do that, realize that. So that's maybe the story about the Werkplaats. Okay, 2 more questions. One there and one there. No, I think in the beginning when we started out, we sat together for like from the beginning till the end. Like we would deal with the project constantly together. How we organize ourselves now, it's a different situation because we're both involved in teaching. At the same time, I have a child. 1 day a week I take care of my child, so my time is very limited at the studio. I'm there only 3 days a week. So Linda is there as well, like 3.5 days, because she's the head of the design program at the Rietveld Academy. So whenever we are together, we have to actually make appointments. When are we going to work on what? So if we want to work together, we really have to say, okay, maybe Monday and Tuesday, because part of the day is, of course, disappears because of emails, all kind of things you don't want to deal with. But to sit together and to design is most of the time limited. So if we work on a project, for instance, like a book, we try to find 2 or 3 or 4 days, and we try to actually to build the structure of the book, to come up with the concept, to work it out in all the different parts of the book, so that the whole design is fixed. And then we ask an assistant who comes at our studio, who actually does the layout. But of course, we look into that. So that's why we need these assistants now and then, because we are not able anymore to do a book completely ourselves, because our weeks are too much splintered into fragments. And then a book would take too much time for the client, then because we can only work for maybe 2 days on the book, and then there's my teaching, there's my child, there are other things, and then the book stays in the studio and it has to go out. So, but that's a very good situation, because we are working so long with each other that we are so quick in finding solutions and also translating it in a good design, to work and sit behind the computer, to look into the typography, to look into solutions for image. And then everything is there, and everything is fixed within a grid, within all the things are, are fixed, and then we give it to someone else. So that's how we do it. But it's funny because most of the time, whenever we have the first meeting with someone, we go back, we are in the car, and Linda starts to say something, I start to say, and you find out that you immediately have the kind of same ideas about it. So we grew up together for such a long time that it's not that we are two different people. Of course, we are two different people, but at the same time, we live in the same kind of, you probably know what I mean. You develop together your work. So that's why you know what language you want to speak. Okay, this was one more question. Yes?
I have a microphone.
Yeah, I see that.
Sorry. Generally speaking, I know everyone gets their inspiration differently. Is there anything you do to refresh? Do you travel? Do you look at other people's?
Well, I think the one thing which is for me maybe the biggest inspiration source is, it sounds a bit obvious, but it's actually looking into art. Partly because it's, of course, we deal with art a lot, contemporary art, but part of it also because we see so many good concepts in art, which sometimes they don't need anything more than just present a concept. So if I bring that back to my own work, I see our work very much as seeking for solutions for a problem. So first you have to define what is the problem and what could the solution be, and then actually the form, the visual translation, should just do that. It should just be a vehicle to actually bring your idea in the right way out there. So for instance, if you think about the Viktor and Rolf magazine, where you start not to design anymore, I can only do that because I know that also in art there are so many artists who have great ideas which actually don't need any kind of form. They are just there. There's just the concept and nothing else is needed. And by understanding those kind of attitudes, I think I'm also able to understand that as a designer you can operate in many different ways, and not only like that you have to deal with a typeface or it's not about that. It's about something else. I think it's more about kind of a mentality or a spirit in your work. So, but it's of course not only art. It's also looking in other fields, like also in fashion, also in architecture, but you can say more of kind of cultural fields, probably. Okay. Thanks.